Thanks so much for taking the time to be here, Jonathan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and as a definitely as a fan of Hinkle Fieldhouse and of Big East basketball, it's great to be here.
Yeah, always gotta love the Big East. Hinkle is a very special place. That is for sure. I want to start with this. You've been covering this Philadelphia Union team. You've seen the ups and all of the downs that sort of came before this season. In your mind, when we entered before COVID and the pandemic, what were your expectations for this team? Are you stunned that they're sitting here as the Supporters Shield champions? Mildly surprised, not surprised at all?
Well, I thought they were going to be good this year. I did not think they would be Supporters Shield contenders, if I'm honest with you. They have been on a long build and a slow build. And this is not a town that does long and slow builds very well.
It's very true.
I thought that they would get eventually to a point where they would be good. I did not think that they would be this good at this point with this group of players. And I don't know when they're going to be next because they're going to lose Brendan Aronson and Mark McKenzie over the winter. They may yet lose Kai Wagner, who's their stalwart left back and one of the best at that position in the league. And I like a lot of the infrastructure that they have. I like their youth academy a lot. I like their sporting director, Ernst Tanner, a lot. I like their manager, Jim Curtin, a lot. But I don't know. I'm glad they won the Supporters Shield this year because, and right now in particular, because I don't know what's going to happen in the playoffs. They might get bounced in the first or second round. And, you know, the coronavirus pandemic obviously continues to just wreak havoc on everything. So they have that trophy in their pocket, and I think that redeems this season more than anything else. I should, by the way, apologize to the folks watching the video here. In addition to it being my day to be on your show, it's laundry day in my neck of the woods. Therefore, a little bit of it is piled up in the back of the scene. Apologies for that.
No worries whatsoever. And you mentioned Jim Curtin, and one of the points you made and sort of the way you started your story that you wrote after he won Coach of the Year was at one point or another, pretty much every Union fan was frustrated with him. Most wanted him gone at one point. I remember Zach Pfeffer scored a goal against DC that I thought might have kept him in the job. Yeah. I mean, years ago. Is there something specific that changed with him these past couple seasons, specifically this season, that makes him unique in his ability to see this thing from a very low point to being the best team in MLS? Or do you think this is just an example of what happens when you have multiple front office people, be it Ernie Stewart, Ernst Tanner, who believe in this coach and just give him time to learn? And then the other part of it too is obviously the talent level has increased dramatically. Do you think this is specific to Curtin, or do you feel like this is more of just a lesson in what happens when you're actually patient with a coach who knows what he's doing?
I think that more than anything else, it's the talent level. You want to win in soccer, you have better players than the other team, you're probably going to win the game. There are exceptions to that, obviously. I do think that coaching in soccer, it makes a difference at the margins. But if there is a considerable difference in talent, that difference is not accounted for by coaching. For example, when you're Atlanta United and you have the talent of Joseph Martinez and Miguel Almiron, and you have a manager in Tata Martino who knows how to use them, simply having a good manager is not going to make up for that. So it's the talent more than anything else. It's Jamiro Montero, it's Kai Wagner, it's Jose Martinez. It's having an exceptional young American number 10 in Brendan Aronson and a very good one behind him in Anthony Fontana. That's not nothing.
For sure.
You know, to have, it's one thing for MLS academies to create players. It's another for them to create 10s specifically, which are the hardest position to bring off an assembly line, especially in a country where we so much value physicality and speed and running in straight lines and jumping in the air and so on.
Yeah. And
but I should say this too. I do think that Curtin has evolved as a coach and grown as a coach. And he'd be the first to say that he was not always a great coach. He was not even always a good coach. He got put into a situation when John Hackworth was fired that he was put, straight into the frying pan immediately. And had to learn everything on the fly and did not have veteran coaches around him to teach him, and did not initially have a veteran sporting director with him in the manner of Ernie Stewart, or certainly of Ernst Tanner. Now, there's one other part of his evolution as a coach that I think relates to Stewart and Tanner, which is that Stewart is a believer in a very rigid tactical playbook. Mm-hmm. It was a very specific kind of possession-oriented 4-2-3-1 that he wanted the Union to play. And he went out and he sought specific players at specific positions. And on the budget that he had, he couldn't really get as many very good ones as he wanted to, especially at striker. And it took heaven and earth to move to get Borek Dochkal at the number 10. And he blew it on left back. And he, I remember him talking very specifically about Austin Trusty, for example, being a left-footed left center back to go in that exact position in that exact way. And the charge then came down on Jim Curtin that he was too tactically rigid. And my response generally was, I think that's coming from Ernie Stewart. I like Ernie. I like Ernie a lot. I think he did very good things to establish the infrastructure of the club, especially in terms of the academy and the USL team and that developmental pathway. But at a certain point, if you're playing a 4-2-3-1 the same way every single game, the other coach is going to figure it out, and you got to do something different in there to try to go win a game. That is the system versus pragmatic reality of the moment, long-term versus short-term question. I'll say one other thing about Stewart before I get to Tanner. I think that general manager of the U.S. national team program is a job that Ernie Stewart is actually better at than general manager of a club, even though I think Greg Berhalter's playbook is a little too complex for its own good. The notion of establishing baselines and principles and guidelines for how to run a national team playing style-wise, I think Stewart is good at that. He's also made he's made a very good hire in Brian McBride to be general manager of the men's team, and he got out of the way on the women's team and let the smartest people he could find run it, which is to his credit too. Very much to his credit. Kate Markgraf and Vlatko Adamowski are as good as it gets. Now we get to the Ernst Tanner chapter of the story. And Tanner certainly has a playing style that he desires to play, which is this narrow diamond 4-4-2 that is the gegenpressing way of doing things in the Red Bull system and in other clubs in Germany that have been very good at it. You see elements of it in Hoffenheim, in Dortmund, in Mönchengladbach. And in the cases of Hoffenheim and Mönchengladbach, those are people who Tanner knows personally because he has worked with them over the years. And his what you might call a coaching tree of coaches he developed is actually quite vast in Europe. But he's not married to that system. And he's not married to the idea that one player must only be able to play one job. If you can play as a winger and as a striker, good. If you can play as a winger as an 8, good. If you can play as a winger as a 10, good. Because then you can throw some things at teams that they might not be expecting, or at least that they have to. When you play the Union, you have to be able to contend with more than one playing style over the course of the game. And yes, it is somewhat predictable that they're going to switch from a 4-4-2 to a 4-2-3-1 around the hour mark when Elsinho comes in. That happens often.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to contend not only with that, but with what happens when Sergio Santos goes from being a striker to a left winger, or what happens when Brendan Aronson goes from being a 10 to a left winger, an 8, and all of a sudden has running room, which is where he thrives the most, as we've all seen what he can do. And then they're going to press you going the other way on top of that, because when Tanner got here, the funny thing about the nature of the pressing system that Tanner is running here, he didn't only bring it in because it's what he knows from the Red Bull organization. He brought it in because he looked at the union and he looked at the rest of Major League Soccer and said, we can be better in transition and make some hay here. And that's obviously what they've done. You look at the kinds of goals that they've scored, they become very good at that.
Yeah,
and absolutely. It's a testament to the quality of player that the union have. Is in this league, if you're going to play a counter press, when you get down the other end of the field, you got to put the ball in net, because you're going to get 5 chances, not 10. And if your striker's batting average, for lack of a better way to put it, is 1 in 5, no, you got to be better than that. And Sergio Santos has gotten much better at it. Again, sorry for having to clean my glasses there.
No worries.
But live television, as the saying goes. Sergio Santos has gotten better at it. And as we sit here recording today, Kasper Shibilko is in a goal drought, but he pulls defenses apart to pieces, which gives Santos and Aronson a lot more room. And Aronson has become much more willing to shoot, which was a part of his game that he was lacking. And now he's got it. And that's why he's worth $6 million now. And then you have, coming off the bench, you have Ilsinho, who can do some things off the dribble. And you have Anthony Fontana, who is really good at seeing where again, here we go. It's a Butler showing to make a basketball reference. Anthony Fontana is the soccer equivalent of a great offensive rebounder. He knows where to get himself into the spaces where the ball is going to come to, either through a shot or a pass to him or a second chance. And it's a headache for a lot of teams in this league. He's very good at that.
When you look at this team moving into the playoffs, you sort of mentioned they could get bounced early. Taylor Twellman brought it up on the Decision Day broadcast, this idea that they might not have, whether it's Joseph Martinez of Atlanta's success, Carlos Vela, Raul Ruiz-Diaz, whoever it might be, that one difference maker that that's the guy that can change a game, can make that one play when it matters, when you're in the 79th minute of a 1-1 game. Is that a concern that you share for this team in the postseason, or do you think that the collective whole is so strong that that's not a major worry?
Look, it's always going to be a worry. It is certainly a worry when they play Toronto, which has a couple of game breakers in Alejandro Pozuelo and Josie Altidore and Pablo Piatti. It is a worry when they play Columbus, which has game breakers in Pedro Santos and Lucas De La Rayan and Darlington Nagbe. I left one out there because I don't think Giassi Zardes is a game breaker. I think the ball just goes in off him. I've never been a fan of his, but then again, every time he scores a nice goal in Major League Soccer, that's 10 more national team call-ups to come in his life. The bigger problem is going to be if they make the final and they play an LAFC or a Seattle or a Portland, and we know what their talents are, how good they are. They really are game breakers. And that's the other reason why winning the Shield matters to them, because you make that Western team come over here in every circumstance. They don't have to leave town for the rest of the calendar year. That's a huge, huge asset. The advantage is to the team that is the Union, which is there at home all the way to the playoffs. That's huge. And we don't know what's going to happen because with the virus outbreaks and everything else, and players who are now coming back from international duty and are not going to quarantine, which I think is absurd. You have to do it. You're either these teams are going to be disqualified because of outbreaks during the playoffs, or they can quarantine now and lose a player, miss one or two players in the early rounds. And they're trying desperately to save the Seattle LAFC game that has all the stars in it. And it's too late because Diego Rossi has COVID with Ecuador. So stop the charade and let the players quarantine for 9 days, whatever it is. And they'll be back. Well, no, they won't all be back for the quarterfinals, I realize, but they'll be all right. And all this whole charade, the big one in terms of the Eastern Conference wildcard round is Rodolfo Pizarro of Miami. They're trying to get him onto the field. Well, he'd better not have COVID and infect his whole team and blow that up. And if they lose to Nashville anyway, then the whole thing's moot. So it's not how I'd be doing it. I mean, and then again, I'd be doing it in the bubble, but what do I know?
When you look at the league as a whole heading into this postseason, outside of COVID and all of the storylines and these international players that are probably going to miss, and the fact Diego Rossi tested positive, what storyline or two do you find most intriguing? What are the things that you're really curious to see as this thing gets underway this week?
There are a few things. I'd like to know how Nashville intrigues me. I mean, I think the playoffs field is far too big.
Yeah.
This year anyway. But Nashville intrigues me because they're probably a lot better. They're probably better than we give them credit for. They didn't play in the MLS's back tournament, so we didn't see them much.
Mm-hmm.
But their defense is really quite stingy. And Walker Zimmerman, rightly, I think, won Defender of the Year. The matchup between him and Gonzalo Higuain in Nashville, Miami is going to be, the one to watch, obviously. And then you want to know whether Miami can beat Nashville, which would set up a Miami-Philadelphia quarterfinal, which I have no doubt ESPN and the league would love to have.
Mm-hmm.
And then if that happens and Montreal upsets New England, the Eastern Conference quarterfinals there are Toronto, Montreal, and Philadelphia, Miami. And you can hear the cash register noises in the background, I'm sure. What else? Is Columbus actually going to win the East in the playoffs? I'd like to know. I think they could. Is Toronto going to? Are the Union going to? I think the Union are going to have to play their opener without Jamiro Montero, who's, I think, their most important player. The one who really makes all of this go. And are they going to have to beat somebody without him? If they have to play New England without him, that's going to be a test. They're going to have to beat New England. They've played New England 5 times this year. They've won 4, and they tied 1. This is going to be the 6th, which is crazy. Can they win that game without Montero? We'll see. And then out of the West, how good actually is Sporting Kansas City? How good really are Seattle and Portland, which are the teams that I think have the best odds of winning the conference? And then karmically, if the Union win the East in the playoffs, the top 3 are Kansas City, Seattle, and Portland. Kansas City with Peter Vermes, who's from Southern New Jersey. One of the very best soccer products in the Philadelphia region's history, Jim Curtin going against him for an MLS Cup. 5 years after they played in the Open Cup and went to the same field.
Yeah.
So that's one. Portland is the team that knocked the Union out of the MLS's back tournament.
Right.
And which the Union have always struggled against every year. And then ultimately, the team that I think, if it was my $5, I'm a terrible bettor. Awful. But if it was my $5, I think I'd bet on Seattle to come out of the West. And then that would be Philadelphia against the team that for their entire history has set the bar against which the Union are measured in so many ways. You know, the Union's first ever game was in Seattle. The first game at that in Chester was the Sounders. There was the Open Cup final that the Sounders won by bringing Obafemi Martins and Clint Dempsey off the bench. You know, and turning that game around after the Union had taken an early lead, or taken a lead, I should say. And then you have the manager that I think Jim Curtin most resembles in this league. And it's not Jesse Marsh, it's not Ben Olsen, it's not Greg Manning, it's Brian Schmetzer. And your listeners and viewers who may have read my piece on Curtin winning Coach of the Year, I wrote this. Yes, obviously there are a lot of huge differences between the Union and the Sounders. From the trophy case to the stadiums they play in, to the sizes of the crowds, to the fact that you can take public transit or even walk from downtown to the Sounders Stadium. You can do no such thing here, and it's a huge mark against the Union. But Schmetzer and Curtin are two managers who have specific visions for what they want to do, the intelligence to execute them, the latitude within their organizations to execute them, the talent to win in various ways, although obviously Seattle has the better pound for pound, you know, star power and so on, and Morris and Rui Diaz and Ladero. But then you have in both of these managers that sort of extra little bit of seasoning of them coaching their hometown teams. And of being guys who as players were good, but not superstars. You know, the adage in soccer is that there are piano players and piano carriers. And Schmetzer and Curtin were both carriers, very much so as they're in their playing careers. And just those little sort of added things from Schmetzer's connection to the ECS, and even the fact that he takes his cup of coffee on the field, you know, before every game, standing out there in the rain, to Curtin's, you know, deep connections with the Union Youth Academy and all of the local kids who've come through there over the years, and the fact that he lives in a row house in the city with his family and sent his kids to the public school down the street. Just a couple of little, and, you know, obviously it's red meat for journalists like me, you know, people who are writing narratives. Of course it is. I know. They're both good coaches, you know, and they're both coaches who are in ideal fits in the places where they are. You know, might they be candidates to manage the national team someday? Sure. Might Curtin go manage in Europe someday if there's a good opportunity? I think it's possible. Depending, you know, once his kids are grown up. But, you know, sometimes I see Curtin and Schmetzer, their names get batted around for the Galaxy or Atlanta or some other high-profile MLS job. I'm not sure they'd fit in as well there in ways that they do at the clubs where they are now. Would they be good? They're great coaches, you know, and that a lot of the ways that they manage translates easily to wherever they are. But some of those little intangibles are specific to where they are now and these specific connections that they have with the club that they're at. And I think that's a little extra something.
For sure. And would they even want to leave these jobs because they're so ingrained, like you said, from the community aspect and just feeling comfortable in these surroundings that they grew up in and all of that too?
I might surprisingly answer yes to that in
Okay.
one particular way. And The Athletic noted this a couple of weeks ago. Schmetzer's out of contract after this season, and he'd like a new deal, and he'd like to get paid what he's worth, and I think he's right. Curtin's been on a bunch of one-year deals throughout his career.
Right.
He's on his first multi-year contract, I believe, of his entire tenure right now.
Wow.
And he'd probably like to make some more money too, and I don't blame him. But In their ideal circumstances, would they necessarily want to leave? What are their dream jobs? No, I don't. Beyond that, I do think these guys are in their dream jobs in a lot of ways, and beyond potentially, as I said, with Curtin, sure, if the U.S. national team called someday, yeah, of course he'd say yes.
If I had to say, give me one team, either conference you feel most confident gets to MLS Cup, gets out of their conference. You said you think Seattle is your favorite in the West. Is that the team that you would pick if you were just picking one from either conference to get to the final?
I think so. It's tough to pick Seattle over Portland, but Portland might just have a few too many injuries.
Yep.
Piled up at this point. Nishgoda in particular. But then, Jeremy Ebavisse has been playing very well. Eric Williams is playing well. Diego Chara is fantastic, and Diego Valeri is Diego Valeri. You can't write either of those two teams off ever, I don't think.
And then finally, before I let you go here on the NWSL side, with this expansion draft, Louisville acquiring the rights to both Tobin Heath and Kristen Press, were you surprised? Do you think this is a major gamble that Louisville are taking and basically just hoping they can convince these two players who have at this point basically no attachment to the NWSL to come back? Do you think this is a play to eventually trade them where they want to go to get more assets? What were your thoughts on what we saw in the expansion draft?
I don't think Louisville did a particularly good job with it. And it's not just those two. I don't know why they drafted Caitlin Ford and Alana Kennedy. If they drafted them to flip their rights to somebody else, then you've got to have a dance partner. And the rest of the league might say, no, we're not trading on your terms. You're stuck with them.
Right. You've lost all your leverage.
Right. And as for Heath and Press, I don't think they're ever going to play a minute in Louisville. Press has wanted to play in Los Angeles for a non-existent NWSL Los Angeles club since she was traded from Chicago to Houston a few years ago. And that was before she got to Utah. If they think that they're going to be able to either execute some deal with Angel City or get cash in the expansion draft down the road or whatever, they might not. For as badly as Press wants to play in Los Angeles, so does Alex Morgan. So do a lot of other players. And that decision ultimately, is Press going to try to throw her weight around? Yes. Is U.S. Soccer going to try to throw its, and the Players Association, all of that, the ways they're all tangled up, is that all going to be a thing? Yes, it is. But I wouldn't guarantee that they're both going to play in Los Angeles because Los Angeles might decide they don't want them. And what?
Right. And it's a gamble, too, with that being so far in the future still in terms of building a roster and getting your decision makers in place and all of that stuff.
Well, that's right. And I know of at least one other player that Sky Blue picked who they're trying to flip. And the teams they've been trying to flip to have said, no, not on those terms.
Very, very interesting stuff there. All right. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time. Really enjoy all of your work and enjoy what is guaranteed to be a bizarre, wonderful encapsulation of everything that is Major League Soccer with these playoffs.
Yeah.